When we look at a plate of food and we think about the macronutrients, meaning the nutrients in that food that have calories, we look at fats and proteins and carbs. Those are the three macros. If you go talk to a bodybuilder and they say, hey bro, are you counting your macros? That's what they're talking about, fat and protein and carbs. And the reason the bodybuilder's counting their macros, the reason the bodybuilder's obsessed with macros, because if you had to pick one thing that had the most leverage in terms of your waistline, in terms of your muscle mass, in terms of your metabolism, your hormones, the way you look and you feel, macros are definitely very important. So a lot more to diet than just macros, but if all you did was balance your macros, you can do a lot. It can be really, really helpful. It's a very high leverage place to start, and most people don't even get that far. And so it's definitely a good place to take a look. There is a fourth macronutrient, aside from fats, proteins, and carbs, and it's called ketones. Ketones are a macronutrient created by your body, and they have very, very interesting effects. They come out during periods of fasting, but there are also ways to induce ketosis through diet by eating a specific way, specifically really high fat and low carb, which we'll get into in just a moment. But when you get these ketones in your system, they do some really interesting things. They're neuroprotective, they reduce inflammation, they can improve your cognition, they can reduce your body fat, especially that visceral fat around your midline. They can balance your hormones, and it happens really, really quickly. It's pretty rewarding. This is why people get really excited about ketosis. It's definitely not for everybody, it's definitely not forever. But for most adults, we don't go into ketosis enough, and going in and out of ketosis here and there, using it therapeutically, using it at different times throughout the week or throughout the month or throughout the year can be really beneficial. It's definitely worth learning about. On this week's podcast, we've got Dr. Will Cole, a recurring guest. He'll talk about ketosis and also inflammation. The two are actually directly connected. If you're new here, Lucas Rockwood Show, this podcast, I go out and find health and wellness professionals, medical doctors, PhD researchers, people in health, wellness, personal growth, and development, and I bring their best research, hopefully actionable stuff that you can use to live a better life. If you like this show, the best way to support me is to take a screenshot while you're listening and post it to social. You can tag me, it's at Lucas Rockwood, and if you'd like to send in an audio question or just talk to me, go to yogabody.com/Ask Lucas, and right from your phone, you can record an audio and send me a question. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the show. So hello and welcome everyone. Today's show is called Ketotarian. I am joined by Dr. Will Cole. Will is a recurring guest. He was on the show many years ago, and Will promotes functional medicine. He specializes in clinically investigating underlying factors of chronic disease, customizing health programs for thyroid, for autoimmune, hormonal dysfunctions, digestive disorders, and brain problems. And he's published courses on Mind, Body, Green on Goop. He's the author of a couple of books. We'll be chatting about both of them. Inflammation Spectrum. Inflammation, of course, something we've been chatting about a lot on the show. And Ketotarian. Keto is the diet du jour these days. So, Will, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's been a while, but I'm excited to be back.
I wanted to start off with a question about keto. You know, it's so interesting to me. I first got into keto in 1999. I was 19 years old, and I was living in Berkeley, and I was having some problems with symptoms of epilepsy. So I started reading about this, and I wasn't using it for a weight loss perspective. In fact, I ended up accidentally losing a whole bunch of weight, and it's just kind of funny how diets kind of come in cycles and things come full swing, and first it's paleo and then it's keto, and everyone's really, really pumped on this keto thing, and I don't really, I think it's really interesting. It's always really interesting to me. Most of these dietary movements, whether it's paleo or you're eating green smoothies or, you know, going keto, most of them are really positive. The one thing about keto, though, what I wanted to ask you about, keto to me is kind of like meditation. It's like people like to read about meditation. They like to get the apps. They like to get the books, but they don't actually do it. With keto, I feel like people are talking about keto. They believe in keto. They want ketogenic friendly foods. And are they really in keto? It's so hard. You have to eat like no carbs. So are people actually in ketosis?
That's a good question, and good. I think there is some truth to that because people are curious about it and looking into it, but not everybody actually is doing it. Being a functional medicine practitioner, like you said, like my day job is consulting patients online with these sort of things, and that's where Ketotarian actually came about, was my own health journey with food and seeing patients and what works and what doesn't, and how to do this practically and realistically just for the everyday person. And you're right, it's not new. The ketogenic diet's not new. It's been used for a long time. And, I growing up, my dad was a bodybuilder in the 80s and 90s, and the bodybuilding community used ketosis in the 80s and 90s, and obviously it's been used, like you said, for epilepsy and research in the mid 20th century, and used historically as well for certain applications. And then because the ketogenic diet is really a fasting mimicking diet in many ways, it elicits a lot of the benefits of fasting. Fasting's been used for a long time, thousands of years. Hippocrates talked about it, and different, traditional societies talked about it too. But now research is catching up with antiquity, as a lot of the things historically that have been used, we're now understanding the mechanisms and the, practical application and how is it beneficial. But so I don't advocate like the conventional ketogenic diet. Ketotarian is a mostly plant-based keto diet where vegan keto, vegetarian keto, and pescatarian keto option. So it's a cleaner way to go keto. And I don't advocate for people to necessarily everyone be in ketosis forever and ever. It's a tool that I use for people, and it's a tool that I use for myself to gain metabolic flexibility. So once somebody gets that metabolic flexibility, becomes a fat burner, gets the anti-inflammatory and the cognitive improving benefits of ketosis, then they can do like a cyclical ketotarian or do it seasonally from an ancestral health perspective. Some people prefer that. So people are absolutely doing that if they're doing a ketotarian lifestyle. And I think that there's a lot of people out there that are reading about this and maybe experimenting with the ketogenic diet, but they're like overwhelmed with the information, or they're going too fast too soon in this dirty keto way of eating and eating lots of bacon and butter and thinking that that's going to be good for long-term health. And that to me is like really missing the point. To me, I don't want to just become obsessive about macros and be high fat, low carb for the expense of looking at the quality of the food and looking at not just the macronutrients, but the micronutrients and the healthy fats and the healthy vegetables that should not be avoided when you do a ketogenic diet in a right way. So yeah, you're right. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of people doing the ketogenic diet, I think, in a way that's not going to serve them long-term beyond the honeymoon period that I think a lot of people do find with the keto diet. So hopefully, like with ketotarian and with when I consult patients, the goal is to do this, but without falling prey to the potential pitfalls of this way of doing this sort of conventional dirty keto way of eating.
And so for people listening, we have fats, carbs, protein, and ketones. People don't really understand how those work. Can you explain that just those macros and how ketones are kind of like the fourth magic macro and where they come from?
Yeah, sure. So macronutrients, like you said, are proteins, fats, and carbs. So all foods are going to be a different collection, a different variety of that. So carbohydrates are things like grains, things like starchy vegetables, things like fruits, and obviously all the processed like carby foods that are out there, and juices and things like that. And then healthy fat or fats in general, like the macronutrients fats would be things like oils and different animal fats, avocados, olives, nuts, and seeds are going to have a collection of proteins, fats, and carbs, but a lot of fats in them. And same with protein. You're going to have different types of sources of protein and different types of amino acids. You have different types of fatty acids and carbohydrates. So all of those are called macronutrients, and micronutrients are all the minerals and vitamins that are in the foods as well. So a ketogenic diet is, by its very definition, a high-fat, moderate protein, low-carbohydrate diet. So because the way that I advocate it in ketotarian, it's a mostly plant-based approach with some animal protein or eggs if you want to have a vegetarian keto or pescatarian keto option. That moderating protein is actually quite easy because you're not having tons of bacon and butter and animal protein. It's quite easy to moderate your protein, which is actually beneficial for a clean ketogenic diet because many different reasons, but one of it is it will stimulate gluconeogenesis and could impact someone's ketosis because of too much protein, which can be a problem for somebody doing the conventional ketogenic diet. So yeah, that's what foods are, and that's the goal when it comes to the keto diet.
This argument that people always make is that, every cell in the body can absorb glucose. We should be carb fueled. We should be fueled off carbs. It's kind of like politics. You argue both sides. It kind of make a little bit of sense. But what do you think about that when people make this argument that our bodies take carbohydrates so well? You put sugar in a baby's mouth and they lick it up, and they don't do the same when you stick a piece of protein in their mouth. What do you think about this sort of human adaptation?
Yeah, I think it's obviously true. I think that's humans can burn both, and that's the goal for me and for patients. For me to get people is for them to have the option to burn sugar and burn fat for fuel. Most people only are stuck in sugar burning mode. They are not fat burners at all because they're depending a lot on carbohydrates for fuel. I'm fine if somebody wants to do a cyclical approach or moderate their carbs or have higher carbs than they want to have that grace and lightness. And I'm not advocating for everybody to be in ketosis all the time, but we've lost our metabolic flexibility living in the conventional way that we're eating with a lot of refined carbohydrates and processed food. So if someone wants to fuel their body with carbohydrates, let's gain some metabolic flexibility so you can burn sugar when you want, but burn fat for fuel as well. And I think that works really well for a lot of people that aren't using the ketogenic diet for more like a clinical, like a neurological issue or insulin resistance or a metabolic issue. Maybe they do want to do a more cyclical approach where they can go in and out of ketosis. So I don't necessarily disagree with that. But it's important to remember that all babies are born producing ketones. And I mean, breast milk and the diet that they're on is a ketogenic diet for all intents and purposes. And even if they're not breastfed, what's added to formula is MCT oil. It's the babies are producing ketones, and they actually need to for proper brain development. So we are all born in ketosis. And obviously we can grow up and start having foods and go in and out of ketosis, but we've then lost it entirely where we don't have the metabolic flexibility. And that is in part the reason why we have the rate of metabolic issues and weight loss resistance and hormonal imbalances and inflammatory issues. Because beta-hydroxybutyrate, the ketone that your body produces, is a natural anti-inflammatory. So it's one of our body's ways to downregulate these pro-inflammatory cytokines that a lot of people are finding themselves with these different autoimmune issues, which is of epidemic proportions, and this mental health issues with anxiety, depression, and fatigue. Well, beta-hydroxybutyrate helps to downregulate neuroinflammation too and provide clear brain thinking. So this is one of the benefits that I find when people start gaining that birthright of metabolic flexibility by doing this way of eating.
I think I originally heard it from Dr. Ron Rosedale, who said that, for sure every cell can use glucose. Our brain is fueled on sugar. But the question is, does that mean we eat it or does that mean we make it? And I thought that was a really interesting perspective.
That's a good part.
A good point. Do we eat? Does that mean we eat sugar all day long? Because that's certainly not good. And so it's a really, really interesting thing. So one of the things that people run into, when I first got into healthy eating, I went really extreme, and I kind of got into this raw food thing. This was ages ago. And I was hanging out with this medical doctor who was really anti-sugar, which is really rare in the raw food community. They're mostly just super carb heads. And so he got me on a super high-fat raw food diet way, way, way back. And so I became really comfortable eating tons of fat, meaning I've eaten at least 50% of my calories from fat for, 16, 17 years, something like that, and sometimes even higher. So, I can have 200 grams of fat in a day, no problem. But what most people really struggle when they start moving into fat, not just from the change of eating, the heaviness of the foods and the different foods, and just getting comfortable sort of slathering your foods in fat, this kind of thing, but actually from a digestive perspective. And I'm curious what your take is on, is it just lipase production? Is it bile? Is it adaptation? For me, it was so long ago, I don't remember. Maybe it just suited my body too. But all I know is that I can take levels of fat that would literally make most people nauseous, feel great, feel energized, my belly's calm, everything like that. But people literally feel vertigo nauseous from so much fat,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I think, back to the carb point real fast, is I agree with it. There's a reason why there are, when you look at clinical nutrition and just the basic mechanics of nutrition, there are essential fats, there are essential amino acids or proteins. There is no such thing as essential carbohydrates. So without a doubt, get it from a phytonutrient, from a fiber standpoint. Of course, I advocate for that in ketotarian But your body will stimulate glucose, make its own through gluconeogenesis. And then to the fat point, the way that I advocate it for in the book is for people to lean into it, to not go too fast, too soon with too much fat, because your body, you're right, your body does have to build up the proper enzymes like lipase to break down those fats. Your GI motility, your microbiome, all the good microbiota in the gut, that has to make that shift as well. Not just your mitochondria to burn fat for fuel, but your actual enzymes in your gastrointestinal system also have to make that metabolic shift to burn fat and digest fat and assimilate fat and absorb fat. So that does take time. And there's some people maybe that they have like a gastric bypass, or maybe they have they don't have a gallbladder, and they'll never be as high as you're eating fat. But that's not really the problem. I mean, they just have to find their macronutrient personal sort of what works for them. And that's bioindividuality, which is the heart of functional medicine. So they'll still be higher fat than they were, but they're never going to be as high as somebody else. So we all have to find our own tolerance to these different macronutrients.
And it's funny, as you were answering that, I realized, for somebody who's been on a moderate or lowish carb diet, let's just say under 150 grams a day, for them to eat a carb bomb meal, let's just say like a burrito with rice and corn and beans and stuff like that, say it's 150 grams in one go, they'll also feel sick. They'll get dizzy and they'll get loopy, and so they'll have kind of the same effect. So I guess it is just a process. I guess that transition period is the make or break time. We're approaching the end of the year, and when we get to January, a bunch of people are going to go on keto, and that first transition period with anything, whether you're transitioning to, it's like the first month at the gym or the first month at the yoga studio or the first 3 months at a standing desk or whatever it is, it's pretty brutal. And, if you're switching over to a new diet and you're feeling gastrointestinal pains and you're feeling bloated and you're not, it's pretty tough to get through. So I guess that's why I think it's just an important thing to think about it is how are you going to make that transition?
Yeah. In Ketotarian, I have two different tracks in there. I have a keeping it simple option, and I have the beyond the basics option. So the keeping it simple is not necessarily being overly focused on macros. It's just kind of generally focusing on have more of these foods, have less of this foods. And again, you're focusing on nutrient dense, clean keto foods. And at that point, I feel like that's honestly where some people should start with, because their body does have to make that metabolic shift. They do kind of have to lean into this to make this realistic and sustainable, because honestly, the last thing we need as a world is another fad diet. Let's use food as medicine. Let's use food to feel good. And that's not jumping in too fast, too soon for something your body's not ready for. So that's definitely the heart of my work. It's not to just do a fad diet. It's really just, let's experiment with food to see how we feel the best. And that's my agenda. And if it's not being in ketosis all the time, well, that's great, because there's a whole chapter about doing the cyclical ketotarian or seasonal or moderating your carbs. I mean, we're all so different. So there's not a one size fits all when it comes to food, just like there's not a one size fits all for so much in life.
So your newer book is about inflammation, and people are suffering from inflammation on all levels: inflammation of their skin, inflammation of their joints. Probably GI inflammation is the more common issue that people listening are suffering with. So gastrointestinal, chronic indigestion, gas and bloating, acid reflux, this kind of thing. And of course, neurological inflammation, right? It's all kind of systemic. But I know that clean keto can be really helpful for inflammation. And in some cases, people even go really, really radical with extreme keto to control inflammation. Can you talk about, maybe we should just start with a basic definition, because I think people toss around, again, keto and inflammation. They don't really explain what it is. But when we talk about systemic inflammation in the body, what is that in reference to?
Sure. So inflammation is not inherently bad. It's actually a good thing when it's balanced. So it's a part of our immune system. It fights viruses and bacteria. It helps heal wounds. It's a good thing. And just like anything in our body, and just like anything in our world, it's about balance. So our hormones, we want balance. Our microbiome, bacteria, we want balance. Our mycobiome, like yeast and fungus, we want balance. Same with inflammation. And the problem is when inflammation is thrown out of balance, this chronic, insidious inflammation, that is a problem. And chronic inflammation is linked to just about every health problem that we face as a world today. So when you look at autoimmune conditions or diabetes or heart disease or cancer or digestive problems, like you said, or musculoskeletal issues, or the mental health issues that we are seeing as a world, like anxiety and depression and fatigue. They all have inflammation in common. They all have either an inflammatory component or are full-blown inflammatory health problems. So, but they exist on a spectrum, and that's my second book, The Inflammation Spectrum, is a deep dive into this concept that inflammation exists on a continuum from low-grade symptoms like maybe some low-grade fatigue or background anxiety, maybe some bloating, some digestive issues on one end of the inflammation spectrum to the other end of the inflammation spectrum, which is like full-blown autoimmune conditions or metabolic issues, and then there's everything in between. So yeah, that's what inflammation is. It's really the heart of what I consult patients with. And it's actually a concept that I talk about in Ketotarian in my first book, because like you said, I mean, beta-hydroxybutyrate, the ketone that your body's producing in ketosis, is an anti-inflammatory, like I mentioned earlier, but it downregulates these pro-inflammatory cytokines like NF-kappa B and it works on the COX-2 pathway. It downregulates NLRP3 inflammasome. Basically, all these pro-inflammatory cytokines that you see higher in people with health issues, the ketone beta-hydroxybutyrate lowers them and brings up these pro-antioxidant like longevity pathways, like the AMPK pathway, the NRF2 pathway. It modulates something called mTOR2, which is associated with longevity and less disease. So I wanted to have this exploration in the inflammation spectrum beyond ketosis. So let's look at foods as a whole and how we can help to lower inflammation and balance inflammation. And then all the non-food ways to help lower inflammation, like practices like yoga and meditation and getting out in nature and looking at screen time and looking at social media addiction and social isolation and toxins. All of these things are constantly and dynamically instructing inflammatory cascades. So let's do what we can to bring our body back into harmony and back into balance, which again, it's really such a essential truth, is that balance is what our body needs. Homeostasis is what our body needs to live a long, vibrant life.
Yeah, I always say that like the one of the most boring things that we all have to focus on is balance, and it's so unfun. Like what we get excited about is extremes, you know? You put like, if you post like, who wants to do a 7-day lemonade fast? Everybody's like, yeah, you know, who wants to run an Ironman in 2020? It's like, me. It's like, who wants to get 7 to 8 hours of sleep and eat 3 or maybe 2 balanced meals and maybe wait 12 hours between dinner and breakfast and do 15 minutes of meditation? It's like, you're so boring, you know? And it's,
yeah.
It's like that boring, the boring middle. True. It's the boring middle. It's where all the juice is.
Oh, yeah. Well, we need to make the middle, the boring middle, the fun middle, I guess. It's just educating people that feeling great is fun. Like doing another fad thing to like stress your body out is really not what we need. You're right. Absolutely right. We need to rebrand the middle. And that's what I'm trying to bring the tribalism to the middle and realizing, hey, look, you guys, part of whatever, all of these tribalism movements within wellness or wherever, political even tribalism, there's normally aspects of truth in all the tribalisms, but it's not the entire truth. So context matters, nuance matters, bioindividuality matters, and that's the middle.
Yeah, it's like, you know, I started looking at it. I live in the Mediterranean, and our life expectancy is super high here, like 83 years, like first or second highest in the world. And so I started just kind of getting into this because I was like, people around here, like, they don't fit the healthy stereotype that people have an idea of. You know, I grew up in Southern California. Everybody's running on the beach and everybody's wearing Lululemon to Starbucks and this kind of stuff. And you don't have that culture here. You know, often I can go in the park here and I'll be the only one running. You know, it's a big city in here in Barcelona. And yet people live a really long time. So it really made me think. I was like, there's more to this than the stereotype and the extreme and the people who get a lot of attention on social media with six-pack abs and huge biceps and you know, pumped up butts and you know, it's really this boring, the people who, the centenarians and things like that, you don't see a lot of them who are impressive, with impressive physiques. You don't see a lot of them who would turn heads, but like, they've lived a balanced life, you know, they've managed they've managed their stress, and they mostly, like most of the time, eat pretty well. They mostly eat pretty good food, and they're doing a whole lot better than the person who eats trash for 9 months out of the year and then goes on a keto binge for January and February. You know, so true. Yeah, it's a message that gets lost in our
content on content,
Yeah.
hyperbolic, clickbait society, but it's absolutely the truth.
So inflammation, one of the biggest challenges is if you look at like the top 10 foods that people eat, which I always like to tell these to people because it's pretty shocking if you actually think of what people eat, which is chicken, pigs, cows, milk, dairy, wheat, soy, rice. I think that represents like 95% of the food in the world. But so many of those are inflammatory, right? And so for people dealing with inflammatory conditions, one of the biggest challenges is you just walk into the supermarket and mostly it's stuff that at least on some level, even if it's just GI tract, is going to create some kind of inflammation. How do you help people think strategically about this when we live in a world that's both carb-laden and also inflammatory food-laden?
Yeah, I think it's just shifting your paradigm to all the foods you can have and doing the best you can with the access you have, the budget that you have, with where you even at headspace-wise. Because I think that part of the problem is that they feel like they have to have all, like they do all or nothing, and this sort of paralysis of analysis and this sense of overwhelm and food anxiety is not good for your health either. Like stressing about eating healthy is not good. So sometimes it's better to just, like you said, keep it simple. Like just do the best you can with where you're at, as long as you're leaning into it and slowly progressing it, because you don't have to, like we're talking about digestion on like a physical level. I think a lot of this content and information needs to be digested on a mental, emotional, even spiritual level too, to even have the vessel to make life changes. Because otherwise you're just like literally putting your whole mind, body, like your mental health, your emotional health, your physical health, your spiritual health is being pushed through something you're not even prepared for yet. So I think that sometimes you have to like lean into it. As long as you're progressing, it's better than someone doing this rubber band effect, and you're going to end up right back where they were at because they did not prepare themselves. And that's honestly what a chapter in the inflammation spectrum is called, Initiate, which is like, let's lean into it. Let's start with the basics. Let's lean into it so you can start to clean up your life. And that's setting you up for success because it's sustainable, it's practical, it's realistic. You can move at your own pace if you need to. So I think that that's so important because, again, I really feel like this food fatigue, this diet disillusionment, because there's so much content, conflicting information online on, Dr. Google, that I think that people can feel overwhelmed. But I would say that's why I wrote the inflammation spectrum, because it is all functional medicine methodologies and a way for you to find out what your body loves, what your body hates, because some people can tolerate some grains or a little bit more sugar or have dairy, and then some people can't have any grains, and people can't have sugar. So what I want people to do is go through a food experiment, a life experiment, to see what your body loves. So you can get food peace. You can have discernment and clarity on what works for your body. So that way you're not hearing this guy on a podcast like throw out things when it's not necessarily applicable for you. I want the people to find their own bio-individuality.
With inflammation, I guess I love the topic because it went unspoken for so many years, and it's often the issue under the issue. So for 2 years, not now, but years ago, gluten was the big thing. And then people are all worked up about dairy or whatever. And like really like, is gluten that bad? Well, not for a lot of people, but like for people who cause an inflammatory response, totally, it's terrible. Is dairy that bad? Well, not really, but if it's causing an inflammatory response, totally it's bad. And so I think a lot of people get kind of caught up in this one thing. They're trying to eat low carb, or they're trying to get everything gluten-free or whatever, without understanding like the big levers. This is what I always see in the nutritional fads, is they tend to be really micro, So, I mean, back in the day, it was raw cacao, and then it was goji berries and raspberry ketones. And is there some interesting things about that? Yeah, sure. But like much more interesting, like, did you eat any healthy fat today? Did you have bread with every single meal? Like that's just such a much higher leverage thing. And I think part of the reason people get really frustrated with food is because they get really sold on these micro things. And so, they hear that, CoQ10 is great. So they start taking that. They take a fish oil or something, and, they try to go for a walk once a week and nothing happens. It's like, well, those are really great efforts, but, we're looking at micro. Like, what if we took something really macro? Like, what if you went for a 30-minute walk every day? Like, just every day. That's going to be life-changing, totally. Or what if instead of having bread with 3 meals a day, you had bread with 1 meal a day? Again, these are just these big macro macro levers that people can pull.
Yeah.
And at least for me, I've just seen people get really excited when they do something, they get a win, they get a result. It's just so much easier to motivate. And a lot of these little teeny things here and there. I swapped out my high fructose corn syrup. Now I'm using honey. Now I'm using agave. It's like, come on, like let's get something really really big, and then you get a win.
Yeah.
And then all the little stuff, maybe that falls into place, maybe it doesn't. But these big issues which people are missing, the fact that almost everything you're eating at every meal is causing an inflammatory response, that really stacks over a lifetime. I've seen tons of people develop funky food allergies and weird intestinal, GI, leaky gut stuff. And it's like, I don't know if you really have food allergies or if you've just been eating like bread and bad oils and peanut butter for 30 years. It's really hard to parse it out.
Totally true. No, I agree with you. I think that people should focus on these bigger areas, because I think a lot of times things do fall into place. It's the interconnectedness of the body. And even if it doesn't entirely resolve, at that point, you'll feel so much better. Like you said, that encourages people, and they just feel better overall. They have more energy, and they have like the mental bandwidth to even take on more stuff. Then maybe they do need to target these few things that have it entirely resolved. But it's definitely, I think you're right. The small things are typically come later. They should not be the first step.
The only other thing that I wanted to chat with you about in terms of inflammation, one of the challenges is that there's a very important psychosomatic element to it, right? Because stress can manifest as brain inflammation or even gut inflammation. How do you think about that in the context of diet and lifestyle?
So it's so important to talk about. I mean, in the inflammation spectrum, in the second book, I have these non-food inflammers, and obviously stress and different forms of stress are talked throughout the book, because it's really doing us no good to just look at food. Yes, food is a modulator. Food does instruct biochemistry, powerful mover as far as calming inflammation, feeding inflammation, or fighting it, doing one or the other. But it is not just about food. And it's sometimes easy for us in the wellness space, especially the food/functional medicine space, to only look at food, because it's so important to look at stress and look at things like social isolation and social media addiction and these sort of non-food things that are they're junk food for the soul. They are going to impact your physiology, and we like to separate mental health from physical health, but mental health is physical health, and we have to look at the interconnectedness, the bidirectional relationship between our thoughts and emotions, in our physiology, and then conversely, our physiology will impact our thoughts and emotions. So we have to look at both sides of things.
Will, I really love your message and your work. Great to have you back on the show. For people who'd like to find your new book and your first book, where's the best place for us to send them? Yeah,
thanks so much for having me again. And everything's at drwillcole.com. That's drwillcole.com. Handle on Instagram is at Dr. Will Cole as well. And you can get the information spectrum, Ketotarian, and we offer a free webcam or phone health evaluation as well for people who do want to get a functional medicine perspective on their case. My day job is not writing books, it is consulting patients. So definitely, I love what I do.
Will, thanks so much for coming on the show, and let's keep in touch. If you've heard about our Yoga Trapeze teacher training course that we've been now hosting in 5 different countries and of course in our home base in Barcelona, but you've been unable to come join us, I'm excited to announce our first ever online version of the course. We're doing an academic version with at-home study, at-home practice, with an option to join us in the future if you'd like. But if you can't join us in the future, or if you'd just like to do the at-home version, we're really excited. We've got a great group of people already joined the course, and it kicks off very, very soon here. To learn about how the course works and for full information, go to yogateacherscollege.com, and on the top navigation you'll see trainings, and click on calendar and you'll see a link to the course there. It's our online Yoga Trapeze teacher training course. It's a 25-hour Yoga Alliance continuing education course. We're super excited. The course starts in just a couple of days, and so check it out. If you have questions, feel free to get in touch. I hope you can join us. We have a listener question from Tanny this week, and Tanny says, Lucas, I know that white sugar is the devil, but I'm trying to make sweets for a birthday, and I'm wondering what is the best sweetener to use. So I appreciate the question. In terms of vilifying sugar, it's not really accurate. Your body can handle sugar. It's not necessarily poison. It's really the poison is in the dose. And here's the deal with your body. At any given time, you have about 4 grams of glucose circulating. And let's just imagine, let's just use the table sugar example. So you take a small teaspoon and fill it with sugar as if you're about to dump that teaspoon in your coffee or your tea. And this is your entire body. That's what it has circulating at any time. It's not that much. And so if you take something like a Coca-Cola, if you take something like an energy drink, if you take something like a Frappuccino, you're taking many, many, many teaspoons of sugar at one time, which gets converted into glucose, which basically bombs your system. Again, stop and think about this for a moment. Put it in front of you on the table, a small teaspoon of sugar. That's all your body can really handle in circulation at any given time. Now it gets even weirder because your body also stores energy really, really badly, stores sugar energy really badly. Pick up your phone and look at this, and you know how lousy your phone is in terms of battery power, right? We have all this advanced technology, and yet the energy store in that battery is terrible, right? You can't even get through a flight without running out of battery. And the same is true with our bodies, incredibly sophisticated, and yet we store glucose as glycogen terribly. Like we have about 350 grams of glycogen, which let's say that works out to like 1,400, 1,800 calories or something like that. When you think about somebody, when they talk about running marathons and people say they hit the wall with endurance athletes, the wall is when you deplete your glycogen stores. There's no more glycogen stored in your body. Where is it stored? Well, it's stored in your liver and in your muscles. And your body drains it really fast, right? So somebody's going to burn through 1,400 calories, 1,800 calories really quickly, and you're completely depleted. It's the exact same thing as your phone. Incredibly smart piece of machinery that runs out of batteries. Your brain, incredibly sophisticated organism that runs out of glycogen really, really quickly. So we have this system that can only handle, it can only take a certain charge, right? 4 grams of circulating glucose. It can only store a really minimal amount, about 350 grams of glycogen. And so it constantly needs, this refeeding cycle is really, really important. So this is where the challenge comes in. It's not that there's anything inherently wrong with white sugar. It's not necessarily the white devil. The big problem is we just eat way too much of it. So what if we move on to other sweeteners like, evaporated palm sugar or date sugar, palm syrup, all these kinds of things. They're just different forms of sugars. In some cases, they're less sweet, and so you get a little bit more flavor for less calories, less grams of sugar, and that can be beneficial. But for the most part, you're really comparing apples to apples, and I mean that quite literally. Some apples are very sweet, and some have less sugar, and some are more wild and more fibery, and so you're just comparing apples to apples. But at the end of the day, you're talking about sweeteners. The only sweeteners that I really steer people away from are the ones that are higher and higher in fructose. So those would be things like agave, or honey is really high in fructose. So to minimize or even eliminate those can be a really great idea, because fructose is even worse. It's the worst of the different forms of sugar that you can take, because it's so lipogenic, meaning it turns into fat so quickly. It doesn't satiate you at all, so there's no satiety effect. You don't feel full at all, and it's just a really lousy way to get energy. It's a really good way to store belly fat, which might be helpful if we live in a different time. But for right now, eating high amounts of fructose is just a really great way to put on some abdominal fat. And so what is the best sweetener? The best sweetener is less. That's it. You want to use white sugar? Go for it. You like cane sugar? Awesome. You like organic, palm date sugar, coconut, all great, but less. That's the ideal, is less. And just remember this if you're trying to figure it out. 350 grams, your liver, your muscles, that's all they're storing, right? Less than a day's worth of glycogen is stored there. Were you to go running or something like that. And then in your body right now, 4 grams, a little teaspoon of sugar is all your body can take. And so the right sweetener is less. Whether it's white sugar, whether it's honey, whether it's evaporated cane sugar, it doesn't make all that much of a difference, but less makes all the difference in the world. If you'd like to learn more about this, about once a year I lead a 30-day sugar detox. You can learn more at yogateacherscollege.com or yogabody.com. It's a really great program. I walk you through step by step for 30 days how sugar works, how it affects your metabolism, how it affects your endocrine system, and most importantly, how to quit, how to get your sugar down to a level where it doesn't affect you in a negative way in terms of weight gain and premature aging and risk for degenerative illnesses and things like this. And we do it in a really, really simple, practical way. And you don't have to give up birthday cake. You can still have some. I hope that's helpful. If you have questions, please write into the show. It's podcast@yogabody.com, or send me a voicemail, yogabody.com/Ask Lucas. We have a question this week from listener Nikki. Nikki wrote in, Lucas, will yoga help to tone my lower back? Tone is a challenging word. It's kind of like fit. It means different things to different people. But I'm guessing, Nikki, that by tone you mean strength in your lower back. And yoga can be really, really effective for strength, flexibility, and balance. But most yoga poses, of course, are focused mostly on mobility. Like if you go searching for yoga for back pain online, you'll mostly find stuff about flexibility. Flexibility is important. It's one of the three legs of the three-legged stool of strength, flexibility, and balance. But you want to make sure that you're working on balancing. That means right and left musculature. And then you want to make sure you're working on strength, which is specifically posterior chain strength. So the muscles in and around your lower back, like your transverse abdominis, these are really important. But also things like your erector spinae muscles, your hamstrings, your glutes, your deep six muscles, all of those play into your spinal stability as well. For people listening who would like to learn more about back health, I have this program called the 14-Day Back Bend Challenge. It's actually poorly named. It should be called the 14-Day Back Health Challenge because the goal is not really back bending. Of course, we do a lot of back bending, but the goal is really strength, balance, and flexibility. But Nikki, that would be my suggestion, is to not just throw stretching at the wall, but also include balance and strength. And then with yoga, you can get some really great results for your spine. Hope that's helpful.
This week's iTunes review comes from Zimat from USA. Zimat says, "The Yoga Talk Show is a great source of health and wellness insights and information. Lucas gives unbiased and honest opinions on many topics, which can improve people's day-to-day life, as well as creating a better future for both men and women. Thank you, Lucas. Keep it up." Thank you, Zimat. You have won the Yoga Trapeze. Please email us at podcast@yogabuddy.com and we'll get it to you.
If you're a regular Yoga Talk Show listener, you'll definitely want to get on my email list. Go to yogabuddy.com/sign me up. When you enter your email address there, we always have free giveaways every month, yoga straps, water bottles, discounts in our shop, and all kinds of other things. When you sign up at yogabuddy.com/sign me up, I'll send you just one email a week with updates about the show, special offers, new courses, and valuable information that I think you'll find useful. So go to yogabuddy.com/sign me up to claim your free prize now.